The three men in dull khaki inspected the top of the trenches to see if they would withstand the expected battering from the enemy artillery. The year was 1917, and the scene was the battle-scarred fields of Passchendaele, Belgium. The three Kiwis knew that they had little time to complete their task. Already one of the artillery guns was finding its range as each shell exploded nearer and nearer to their position. "We better get out of here, that gun is getting pretty close." No sooner were the words out of the soldier's mouth than it happened. A deadly shell dropped within a few metres of where they were standing. There it lay, its angry blast miraculously diffused. It was the only dud shell that gun fired that day. 20 years later, one of those men became the father of his fifth child, miraculously preserved until his time of arrival on the 8th of March 1937. That child was named Ronald Cameron Collingwood, the recorder of these memoirs. My dad, George W Collingwood, was a sergeant in the First World War and served in the infantry, in the trenches, as a sniper and as a Lewis gunner. His service number is recorded as 39762 from the Taranaki Regiment. He fought in France and Belgium. He had some other remarkable near misses during his war experience. He relates that on one occasion, while fighting from the trenches, the soldier next to him exclaimed, "George, I think I'm going to faint." My dad looked over at him and saw that a piece of shrapnel had crashed into the soldier's lower back, destroying his vital organs. He slumped over and died. It could so easily have knocked out my dad instead. On another occasion, during a charge at the enemy, as the soldiers scrambled out of the trenches, my dad, who was next to the officer leading the charge, saw a blue hole appear in the soldier's forehead as a sniper's bullet found its mark. My dad picked up the battle cry, "Charge!" and continued to lead the soldiers towards the enemy position. Apparently, they were successful in that mission. But again, how near he was to catching the sniper's bullet. The battle at Passchendaele was the most notable for my dad. He relates that he had charge of the Lewis gun team of 5. The gun had become so overwhelmed with mud that it failed to work properly. He looked longingly towards a small brick farm shed that was near at hand. Was it worth the risk? He shared his thoughts with the others in this team. "If we can get to that shed, we'll be able to clean the gun and get back into action. It's no good staying here and being useless." One of the team agreed to go with my dad. The other 3 refused to go because the risk of being picked off by the enemy was considerable. "Okay, let's go." So the 2 of them scampered across to the shed. They had made it. The gun was duly cleaned and ready for action. They knocked out some bricks and poked the muzzle of the gun through the hole and began firing. The enemy detected where this menacing threat was coming from and directed concerted fire at the shed. It collapsed in a pile of rubble. My dad and his teammate were both wounded. My dad had caught a bullet in his stomach. Fortunately, the first field ambulance guys had seen what had happened, and a rescue party managed to scramble them to safety. Ironically, they lived to see another day, while the other 3 members of the team who had refused to make the dash to the shed perished in battle. The wounding my dad received then probably saved him from a bloody demise later on in the battle. He eventually, like many Kiwis, they were repatriated to Walton-on-Thames in England, eventually arriving there, and there was a special hospital set up to look after the Kiwi troops who had been wounded. Eventually he found his way back to New Zealand and went back to Eltham, his hometown in Taranaki, and there he became a champion road cyclist, and he had fastest time credited to him for about 3 of the round the mountain road races. He took up joinery as his picked up his trade again as a joiner and furniture maker, and married Ivy Perrott in Whiteley Memorial Church in New Plymouth. In his earlier days in marriage, he decided that money was very short. It was the Depression years, and so he became part of a team to help build the Waiouru military camp during the World War II. He became a member of the Home Guard and kept his great interest up in the forces right until his death. Unfortunately, when he was only 63. So that's the story of my dad, and I'm proud of him.
Absolutely. It's very interesting that your father obviously talked a lot about his wartime experiences.
Yes, he did. Yes, many of them didn't, I know.
Many of them didn't.
Yes.
So when did he start telling you these stories? Were you small?
My dad started telling the war stories when I was quite young, and I was fascinated by them, and realised, of course, that his life was so narrowly in the balance in so many occasions, and I was so thankful that he was still with us and was able to lead a good life when he got back to New Zealand.
Yes, he seems to have had a bit of luck, and you do
He
need
did indeed.
that, don't you? Yes,
Yes.
with bullets and shells and the many things that could go wrong in wartime. I see you've got his medals there. Can you
Yes.
tell me about those?
Yes, I don't know very much about them, except most of these medals actually belong to my uncle, who was also in the same era of war. There's one of these that belongs, actually was my dad, which was given to him in England as a thanksgiving, I think, for his involvement in the Allied forces. These lower ones concern his involvement in Passchendaele and France and Belgium. These top ones, these little ones, actually are World War II medals, I've discovered.
Right.
Because as a member of the Home Guard, I presented with these as well to commemorate and acknowledge his support there.
Right. Now you also had some photographs to show us, didn't you?
Yes.
I'll just pass them over and perhaps you can hold them up
Certainly.
to the camera.
Yes. This is a photo of my dad in uniform. He would have been about 19 years old when that was taken. And there's another one here standing up, which is also a very good photograph of him. And again, I said it was just before he went overseas. As a 19-year-old he was then. Interestingly, next door to it, that's a photo of me in the compulsory military training. That was taken at Burnham Military Camp as an 18-year-old. and I did my core training in Ardmore, and then went down to Burnham because I thought I might as well learn something useful while I was in the forces, and so I learned some medical skills as a member of the 1st Field Ambulance. My dad, of course, became a cyclist, and that's a photo of him there. And he was, as I said, the champion Taranaki road rider, and had got fastest time on the Round the Mountain races. So I'm not sure, forget who the guy was next to him. He did tell me, but I haven't got it. So, but that's him there, looking very strong and fit and ready to go.
Well, thank you very much. That's wonderful. He was obviously a happy man, had a happy
Yes,
life after his
he
wartime.
did. He had to work very, very hard during the Depression years, and that's one of the reasons why he went to Wairuru, because work was so very, very difficult to get, and there was comparatively good money down there. And I remember him coming home. We lived next to a railway station, Sturgis Road, Henderson, where we lived. And I remember about once a fortnight him coming home and we were all excited. We rushed out to meet him as he got off the train. And
Yes.
yeah, it was great. But he was very good. He didn't spend his money. He brought it all home, and eventually set up his own business as a furniture maker in our own property, which was great.
But 63 these days is probably quite young
Yes.
to die. And I'm sure a lot of the men did perhaps suffer as a result of their war service, even if they came home.
Yes.
It marked everyone, wouldn't it?
It does. He actually had Hodgkin's disease, which is a form of cancer.
Yes.
But sometimes we wonder whether he was working in a lot of dust, and
Yes.
because he was working for himself, he wasn't as careful as he might have been about getting the dust out of the way with vents and so on, and he probably accumulated more than he should have. So that could have been one factor in that as well.
But he survived Passchendaele, and that in itself was a remarkable
That was a
thing.
remarkable achievement, yes.
Yes, it was.
It was.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us.
You're very
And,
welcome. It's a real
we'll-
pleasure.
We'll